we should be doing every and all types of exercise. There's a word that you might have heard, vaginismus. Vaginismus is the response of the pelvic floor to the thought or to penetration, so tightens up. It's difficult to understand where the pelvic floor is, and this is where that big kind of stop your pee midway, that's how you do a kegel thing came in. And that's also wrong because your bladder is actually a very complex structure. So we're not supposed to stop our pee midway.
In what contexts? Where are you experiencing pleasure as you've just described that?
People want to be strong so that people invest in them.
What is it that I have to do in order to experience that thing?
It's difficult to understand where the pelvic floor is.
Emma, thank you so much for being here with us today. I know you are in the middle of a big move, so I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and share your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So I'll be honest, this episode I've been a little bit nervous about because I feel out of my depth in a way. I feel like I don't know that much about this topic, which is obviously why we should have the conversation. And we're going to be talking about pelvic health. And will you tell us what exactly is pelvic health and what is part of the pelvis? What are all the bits that are part of it?
Okay, so firstly, you're not the only one who feels uncomfortable. Most women actually don't understand their anatomy well, which is why I think, we need more podcasts like this and we need more open and candid conversations about these topics. So let's break it down. Let's come back to anatomy first, which is one of my favorite topics, the pelvis in particular. So when we think of the pelvis, if you look at a body, right, it's basically the base from which we move, right? Well, our legs are moving from it, our upper body moves on top of it. So it's such an important structure. Not that the others aren't, but for women in particular, I would say it is a more important structure because we know that depending on what your life looks like, you might want to carry and birth a baby. And there are lots of changes that happen in our body throughout our life. And all those organs that kind of move with that is in our pelvis. So let's look at the anatomy. Firstly, pelvic floor. That's a big buzzword, right? We often hear pelvic floor, do your kegels. Everybody always knows what a kegel is for some reason, but not why they have to do it. So if we look at the pelvic floor is a hammock-like structure of muscles, actually 3 layers. And they play such an important role in the movement and the function of the body. So I like to break it up a little bit. So firstly, your pelvic floor is there to support your organs. And as females, we've got 3 organs. We've got our bladder, right? We pee. And we've got our uterus, where we might grow a baby. And we have our rectum, where we poo from, right? So really important organs, and they need to be supported. They need to be kept up. And because we've got 3 holes, that's also something that women don't often know. And we've got 3 holes. So the one we pee out of, which is not the same as the vagina. People sometimes think it is that the one that we pee out of is called the urethra. And then we have the vagina, and at the back we have the anus. And we know what happens from there. So firstly, for support, we need these organs to stay up. And because women have a structure called the vagina, which is the internal part, mainly our sex organ, we know that that's where we have sex from and that's where we birth a baby. It's quite a accommodating structure. And often what happens, be it with age or post-birth, you can have organs shift into the space of another organ, in this case, into the vaginal wall often. It's not the only place, but that's what happens when there isn't enough support, if our pelvic floor doesn't give us enough support. So that's a really important function, supposed to support the organs, keep them up, keep them in their place. And the next thing that it does is stability. So it's the base of the core. And if you look at the core, now we often think the core is our six-pack muscle, right? Everybody's like, oh, look at me, I've got a great core because I've got a six-pack. No, that is not the core. The core is the pelvic floor at the bottom, the diaphragm at the top, and then it's surrounded by what I like to call the corset muscle, which is the transverse abdominis muscle. So it's quite a deep-lying muscle, and together they form the cylinder. There are a few other muscles that play a role in the deep core, multifidus and deep little gluteal muscles, but for kind of an easy explanation, I leave them out. So that core, that is a really important structure for us as well. We often don't know how to activate it or how to use it, and that the pelvic floor is a part of it. So being the base of the core, it's supposed to stabilize our pelvis for movement. And there's a lot of movement that happens. If you think about all the movements that your hip can do, it's a mobile joint, so it's able to move quite a bit. So it needs a stability structure to hold it in place. And that's where the pelvic floor also plays a role in stabilizing the pelvis. And then it does something called sphincter control. Sphincter meaning a little hole. So it allows us to keep pee and poo in, and it allows us to relax and let it out. Okay, so that's really important too. Maybe you've heard of some women that have complained of leaking, laughing too much, when you have a girls' night and everybody's laughing so much that somebody pees in their pants. That has happened, because that does happen quite often. Or you sneeze and oops, a little bit of leaking. That doesn't always happen with childbirth, but often it is associated with that. And then the last one, which depends on who you are, it's my favorite one. It gives us sexual function. It actually allows us to orgasm. And let's be honest, we as women, I'm pretty sure, know that female orgasms are amazing.
You got so excited about it.
Come on, they're amazing. So orgasm is actually like a rhythmic contraction of the pelvic floor, in this case superficial pelvic floor muscles. It can go deeper as well. So people often talk about different types of orgasms, and you can get, but it's more like the intensity of them and what's being stimulated. What is being stimulated is the clitoris. That's also a contentious subject. We can talk about that later. Okay. But that is the pelvic floor, and that is such an important part of your anatomy that you need to know about. Right. So I've got a lot more to say.
All right. Tell us everything.
So, often if we go back to the word kegel, right? We often are told that if something's wrong, you're doing your kegels, right? And the word kegel is actually, it's from a man, a doctor called Arnold Kegel. He came up with this idea for women who had incontinence post pregnancy. He said, well, why don't you exercise those muscles, which was a great idea, right? But we all kind of just get lost in this word Kegel, and we all think that we must squeeze and stop our pee midway, and that is just not okay. So I like to bring it back to a typical muscle that we might all gym, biceps. Right? We all know what a biceps curl is. It's when you pick up the dumbbell and you bend your elbow, right? That is what your biceps are supposed to do. So they shorten, they contract, and then they lengthen and get long. And both of those are contractions. Now, if you had a tight pelvic floor, if you were only ever taught to do kegels, right? Exercise, squeezing, holding, then your pelvic floor is tight, and a tight pelvic floor cannot possibly be functional. A muscle wants to move throughout its entire range. That's what it wants to do, to be healthy and to be strong. So if you have a tight pelvic floor and it's almost stuck in this shortened or tighter space, its ability to contract and to relax fully is not there. So we don't all want a tight vagina. If we can say that. Yeah. So we need to train our pelvic floors to be able to do almost everyday movements, but throughout its range, and fast twitch muscle fibers too. So being able to do something quickly, and then being able to relax fully, to allow us to pee, to poo, to have pain-free sex. Yes.
Okay. That is all so interesting. Thank you for packaging that nicely. And like, I also understand things a bit better now. How do you, something that I find difficult to explain to women is how to activate those muscles. So I can do it myself because I learned at a very young age, but for some reason, a lot of movements I can explain very clearly, but I struggle to teach people how to activate, not sucking in your abs, okay? That's what I see people doing, but to actually deeply activate the core muscles. So do you have a way that you teach people this?
Yes, I do. Now, we are going to make it really simplified, but it is important to know that some people might have tighter pelvic floors, and most people actually have tight pelvic floors. So their ability to relax completely is not always there. So one of the first things I teach anybody when we're talking about the pelvic floor, when we're talking about the deep core, is to breathe. So we look at how breathing happens, or what happens within the body when we breathe. As we inhale, we know that our lungs inflate. They inflate because the diaphragm is flattening, so it's moving down. So everything kind of fills up in here. The pelvic floor needs to relax to make space for that cylinder that we spoke about just now, that core cylinder. To make space for it, the pelvic floor needs to relax. So as we inhale, pelvic floor relaxes. And as we exhale, pelvic floor contracts. Now, this doesn't happen with us constantly having to think, oh, is it working? Am I doing it? It's doing it naturally. Hopefully, if you have a functioning pelvic floor, if you're not struggling with any sort of pelvic floor dysfunction, then that's what's happening naturally. But to teach someone to use it, we often say, let's start with a nice deep belly breath. When we do a belly breath, that expansion, breathing into the lower belly, breathing into the belly button, allows women to just relax a little bit more into their pelvic floor. I sometimes talk about a pelvic floor breath, or breathing into your vulva meaning the female genitals. You could also breathe into your vagina, but depends. So we start with that, just trying to relax it, seeing if we can bring a little bit more awareness to where it is. And then the first time we start to activate it, I always like to teach the activation on an exhale, because that's what's supposed to happen. And you as a movement teacher, you know that often, when we say do this, people inhale to do it, right? And that's wrong. Exhale as you load. That's typically what we want. And it's easier, it's almost the body's kind of cheat way to do things is to inhale and do something.
It's almost like you're amping yourself up. Hey?
Yeah, like, I'm gonna pick this up.
Yeah.
Where we should exhale as we pick something up, or contract our pelvic floor. Now, it's difficult to understand where the pelvic floor is. And this is where that big kind of stop your pee midway, that's how you do a Kegel thing, came in. And that's also wrong, because your bladder is actually a very complex structure. So we're not supposed to stop our pee midway. When we pee, we poo, we have sex, we've got to tap into our parasympathetic nervous system, our relaxing nervous system, the resting, the digesting nervous system, to allow us to relax the pelvic floor so that it can open and let go. Think about if you're having like a real stressed day or something bad happened, you're not going to go like, okay, cool, I'm going to go to the loo, or yay, great time to have sex with my partner. No, you want to be relaxed, you want to be comfortable. So that's something that I hear often when women say, oh, just stop your pee midway. Oh, there's nothing wrong with my pelvic floor because I can stop my pee midway. That is more just a way to know where the pelvic floor is. Those muscles that when you need to hold a pee or a poo in, or a fart. Women always know how to hold a fart in. Men don't.
Okay. So they don't learn that muscle through holding that.
They should, because men also have pelvic floors, but this chat is about women, okay? Yeah. But so to activate it, we often say, hold a pee, hold a poo. You might have heard think about picking something up with your vagina. And doing that on an exhale is how we can start to teach people to use it. And often, just think about yourself, and you're welcome to do this with me. Let's take a nice deep
I've been doing
breath.
everything while you've been talking. I've been doing all the things.
I've been saying pelvic floor. You're like, So let's take a nice deep breath in. Maybe just put your hands on your belly. And let's inhale into the belly. Just fill it up. See if you can breathe kind of into your vulva, into your pelvic floor. And exhale, let's just release and let go. Good. So we just bring a little bit of awareness to this. Inhale in through the nose. And exhale. Now see if you can send a little bit more air into your pelvis, into your vulva. Inhale. And exhale. It might be the nerves, but I just noticed as I inhaled into my own pelvic floor, I was actually holding on, which is crazy. This is what we do. I'm nervous because I'm sitting here. We're being filmed. So I'm a little bit nervous. So I'm holding on. So I'm tapping more into my sympathetic nervous system. So as we breathe, it just helps us tap into that parasympathetic, the rest, the digest nervous system. And then let's do a little bit of exhale with it. So let's take another deep breath in through the nose. And I want you to exhale through pursed lips as long as you can. Do you notice what happens almost to your pelvic floor, a little bit to the lower abs? It just, you can feel them starting to contract. Right? Yeah. So now if we bring a little bit more awareness to this, we can say, imagine you are picking up a blueberry with your vagina and you're slowly lifting it all the way up to your belly button. Naturally, just that cue of the belly button also allows people just to activate a little bit more into the lower abs, the deep core. It's working together. It has to work together. We don't work in isolation with any muscles. If we're doing a bicep curl, our triceps are working. It's normal, it's natural for all the muscles to work. But when it comes to deep core activation, I like to say it's a secret, right? So as we're sitting here, you and I are not busy like clenching our bums and moving up and down as we contract, and we're also not, other than deep breathing, we're not really changing anything else. Tightening, holding on, making fists with our hands, crossing our legs. And that's all signs of a little bit of dysfunction, not being able to activate your pelvic floor, using the other muscles to try and do it, which is also what women really struggle with.
Okay, I think that's great. I love the breathing, just to actually bring that attention and to realize, it's actually contracting, even though I'm not thinking of contracting it. And I think it probably would be so useful for women to do that out of exercise first, because now we're doing like our exercise and we're trying to think of doing the pelvic floor and we're dying and da. So maybe just to do that on its own and then work it into our exercise.
Definitely. That's actually a beautiful way of putting it, because if we think of any exercise, let's say learning how to run. Now, we don't just go run a 5K. We start by walking, right? And we start by breathing. We start by getting the kind of kilometers in, and then slowly we'll start to run little bit for little bit. Maybe we'll start adding weight on, depends on if you're running up a hill. That's how we train muscles. We've got to break it down. And often, and that's what would happen in my practice, is we'll start with the breath. We'll start with knowing where the pelvic floor is, how it works, activating it, and then start to load it. And load, meaning picking up a weight. Now, often we speak about women that needing pelvic floor help when they've postpartum or postnatal. It's not always helpful then. We should have done it before. Because now you give a woman a baby and the baby's only growing. So they're already loading a system that might not be working functionally optimally. So yes, you got to take it back to training a normal muscle. And everybody's cues, you would know as a movement teacher, you might say, I can't think of anything now, but draw your sit bones together. That might not make sense to everybody in your class. So using like different cues for different people is really important, but always relaxing first.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. You were speaking earlier about stopping your pee, and I immediately thought this question. This is one for the germaphobes, and I'm sure you're about to shatter their dreams here. So many of us, when we go to public toilets, we are hovering above the toilet while peeing. Is that okay?
No.
It's not okay.
I'm so sorry.
I thought
but
so.
I think, I always tell my patients, my friends even, I'm like, have you ever heard of someone picking up a disease from a public toilet? Other than maybe COVID. You don't. Toilets we don't sit on it with our vulvas, your legs sitting on it. And if you're really, really concerned, you can spray it down, wipe it down. But we need to relax when we pee, when we poo, and when we have sex. So we need to be relaxed. And you can't possibly be relaxed. You're using your glutes, you're using your quads, you're using your hamstrings as you're hovering there. Some of us might still be holding our handbags because God forbid we put that on the toilet floor. I would suggest sitting, which is something that's been hard for me to do as well, but it has done wonders for my own pelvic health. Just learning to relax and to let go.
Yeah, okay. And is it common, I feel it's probably common, for people to experience pain during sex? Is this maybe more common than we think?
So firstly, it is quite common, and women don't speak about it. So often we don't actually know, especially in a country like South Africa, we don't often have the stats supporting it. And women don't often speak about it because they feel very ashamed, and they might not, want to share that their kind of sex life with their partner, with their husband, is completely non-existing because they have a lot of pain. So it is actually fairly common. It's quite common in my practice. I think just because of the information that I put out there, I think people are drawn to it. I myself have struggled with sexual pain and sometimes still do. And that's because of my own history and surgeries that I've had that might trigger it. But knowing about it means I can manage it and stop it from happening. Maybe not now because I'm quite stressed with my move. So I'm not having the best sex of my life, but
it will come back soon.
Hopefully.
Hopefully by the time this episode airs, things have changed for you.
So what I actually mean by that, don't worry about me, I have great sex. But when you're quite stressed, your pelvic floor tends to be tighter. I mean, I just said, I noticed me just talking and being here, I've been kind of holding on and not letting go and not just allowing my body to relax. If you think about women in this country. I'm just actually watching the people walk past, and so many of us, we don't feel safe. I walk into a shopping center, I don't feel safe. I hold on to my bag. I'm scared somebody's going to grab my phone out of my hand, or, a lot of the time we're actually holding on quite a bit. And then we go home, and then there might be some situations happening at home, stress, financial stress, and all of that. And then you expect someone to have fantastic, amazing sex. Pelvic floor needs to be relaxed for penetration to take place. But that's not the only reason that one might struggle with sexual pain. There are many other reasons as well. In South Africa as well, being more conservative, and it's some people don't quite agree with this, but we are quite a conservative nation. If we talk about pelvic physios, people don't know what pelvic physios do. It's a very new thing. In France, the government pays for 10 pelvic floor sessions post any birth because that's how important it is. Here, we've got to convince people that we're going to put our finger up your vagina to feel the muscles, okay? But we're quite a conservative nation, and we've got lots of different cultures, but we've got lots of different religions. And there's quite a strong link between very religious upbringing and sexual pain. You can just imagine, we often with strict religious upbringings, you get women are told you're not allowed to have sex before marriage, right? Keep your legs closed. Oh, don't do this. Close your legs. Sit like this. Do it. And you get married and you must open your legs up and sex must be amazing, right? It's not really how it works. If you don't even know what your anatomy looks like, because it's harder for us to see our anatomy, so we don't often look at it. And we're told not to touch or to feel. We're little boys, little babies are already pulling and yanking and looking, and they can see there, so it's easier for them to feel open about it and to touch it, for instance. With women, it's also something that we don't talk about. We definitely don't find a mirror sometimes, sit there with the spread eagle to try and see what's happening, which we should. We should know what our own anatomy looks like. But with these kind of strict religious upbringings, we often get women getting married and, never having any sort of penetration take place, because it depends on the culture, but most religions are like, any penetration is sex, so you can't have it. So that can be a reason. And then back pain, chronic back pain can be due to a tighter pelvic floor, dysfunctional pelvic floor. Postpartum, often the stress relating to what does it look down there, what does it feel like if it was a typical, I don't like calling it natural, a vaginal delivery, because any delivery that takes place is completely fine if mom and baby are healthy. So, if that happens, sometimes there might be tearing that takes place, a little bit of scar tissue around the entrance of the vagina, which might cause superficial pain or penetration pain. And then, I wanted to say basically size difference. It depends. I always say, people always laugh at this, but if you look at like a typical white male, he tends to not have such a large appendage like our African.
Is that really true?
Yes.
Is that really true? Okay.
That is definitely true.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's completely fine. But I can also tell you, and if there are any men listening, we don't care what the size is, but we do prefer medium sizes, not so much the larges.
Okay. So many misconceptions.
Yeah.
Hey. I was thinking now about when you were talking about the pain during sex, and I'm also thinking about how us as women often don't feel super comfortable in our body. So at the same time, we're supposed to be feeling super relaxed, but we're feeling like, I want to look a certain way, my boob is hanging in a weird way like this, and you're trying to like look good while this thing is happening, and that surely can only make things worse.
Definitely how you feel about yourself and will affect what your sexual experience is like. But when it comes to pain, there might be other issues as well, anatomical or, like we said, deep-rooted psychological issues. I have treated many women who have had sexual abuse as children or in their adult years, and that definitely affects it. That and the religious part is almost the biggest the biggest sexual pain clients I've seen in my practice. But yes, how you feel and how you feel about yourself 100% will affect how much you enjoy yourself. Just talking about this, the other thing that often we have this big misconception is that penetration during sex is what makes woman orgasm. It is not. We have this beautiful organ called the clitoris that its sole purpose, this is how I know that there's a Lord, okay? Its sole purpose is for pleasure, which is amazing, but it needs to be stimulated. And I usually tell my clients, penis in vagina does not mean that the clitoris is being stimulated. Not necessarily, depends. If it's a really large penis and there's no kind of stimulation on the top part, we call it where the mons pubis is, that's kind of the top part of your vulva, so your genitals, If you move just a little bit below it, that's where the kind of head of the clitoris is. It's a tiny little nub. It's not that small. It's actually quite a large structure that sits internally. If that's not being stimulated, then your ability to orgasm is not that great. And there's nothing wrong with you if that happens. I often think porn has completely confused men and women. So we don't just orgasm spontaneously when we look at a penis. That's not what's going to happen. It needs to be stimulated, and everybody likes something different. And that's completely okay. But you've got to figure out what that is for you. And I'm not saying everybody needs to go touch themselves and figure that out. But if you want to, you can. Also, they're great little devices called vibrators. They'll help you figure it out pretty quickly.
So I wanted to just touch on this a bit more, where you're saying sometimes due to either the religious upbringing or shame around this, this obviously is going to manifest in pain. And I'm thinking, if you are feeling that way going into sex, the idea of pleasure is so far removed that it's more like, let's get through this thing. We need to just do this and get through it. So have you, with any of the clients you've worked with, have you found any techniques to help someone, I suppose it's really more on a psychological and emotional level, to start being okay with that? Because I think that people who are raised with that belief system, marriage doesn't automatically make you feel like, okay, now you can have guilt-free sex, you're allowed to have pleasure. I don't think it swaps over, I imagine, that easily. And maybe there's some training we need to do on our own brains, even getting into that relationship.
Yeah, so let's take it back to what can happen, what causes sexual pain. Because there are different causes for it. So there's a word that you might have heard, vaginismus. Vaginismus is the response of a pelvic floor to the thought or to penetration. So tightens up. And that tightening might be super, super tight, so much so that no penetration can take place, even a finger, even an earbud. You'll be surprised. Or maybe penetration takes place, but it's sore. It's sore when it goes in and it doesn't necessarily relax. Sometimes it does, and then it's okay, but it's going to happen every time penetration is going to take place. So that's called vaginismus. You get different stages of it. But then you can also, with any sort of chronic irritation, and chronic irritation meaning pain during sex, surgeries, history of abuse, anything like that, you get something called allodynia. Allodynia is like an umbrella term to any sort of altered sensation. And if that kind of altered sensation, often it presents itself as hyper sensation. So almost if we to touch the vulva, just like that, softly, the response is, oh, that burns, or that's actually really sore. It feels like you punched me, That's called allodynia. Vulvodynia, vestibulodynia, these are just kind of where it might take place. But the vestibule is the entrance to the vagina. So if that's got a heightened sensation, it's always going to be sore. And you can just imagine pelvic floor is going to respond. So they might have vestibulodynia with vaginismus. So we have to look, if we look at managing that, we have to look at the root cause. And often, yes, the root cause might be psychological, but now presents as a physical pain, a physical response. So we have to treat both of them. I always suggest psychology to all of my patients. Actually, to anyone, really. Everybody needs a good psychologist. Yes. We need a soundboard to shoot our ideas off of, and people that don't love us that can give us feedback in a different way. So that is really important. Sometimes a psychologist also just can help you navigate all those thoughts and feelings that you actually might have, and you don't know how, and they kind of come out in this pain or in this way you feel about yourself. But then we've got to work on that fight or flight response. So, I spoke about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic is the fight or flight. So if you are scared, this is going to hurt, or you've never done this before. You look at it and you're like, well, that's a big thing. I don't think it's going to go in there. That response is to tighten. So we've got to manage the body's response. So we've got to tap back into the parasympathetic, which is really hard to do. So often what we do as physios, but also what you can do at home, I'd always suggest that you see a healthcare professional, but what you could start with is actually see if you can manage penetration. And it doesn't have to be with what we call dilators, which are different size kind of phallic shaped objects, that we teach the body to not have that response when anything enters. You can start by seeing if you can put your own finger in. And how does that feel? Does it hurt? Is it sore? Can you push on the muscles? Can you find the pain? If it's too sore, if it's not right, don't worry. There are lots of physios that can help you, and lots of other healthcare professionals, doctors and psychologists, that can help you on this kind of healing journey. But I'd always say, if it's your first time, let's say, having sex with your husband, you've come from this religious background, breathe into your belly, take your time. There's this thing that it's quick, like, hello, here it is, put it in. No, see if you can put a finger in first, maybe your husband or your partner can, and see how that feels. It doesn't have to be this rushed process.
All right. And then exercise and the pelvis. So what are good types of exercise to do, and are there exercises that we shouldn't actually really be doing?
So, no, we should be doing every and all types of exercise. But if your pelvic floor is not functioning properly and your core isn't activating properly, I do often say stay away from certain types of exercise until you are strong enough to do it. So I would, look at my long pause here. I'm trying to say this in a nice way because there are lots of people that love HIIT training. HIIT training is fantastic. It really, really is. Not for me, it's not my personal preference, but fantastic form of exercise. It shouldn't be the only form of exercise you do. We need to slow things down sometimes. You need to know where your core is and how to activate it. So starting with a simple dumbbell rows, for instance. That is such a good core exercise if you are breathing correctly. And by breathing correctly, I mean inhale to prepare, exhale as you contract, as you lift, as you hold your deep core, and as you lift your dumbbells up. Same with an overhead press, for instance. And these are things that we often do in HIIT training. But if you don't know how to do it slowly, correctly, you're definitely not going to do it when you are pushing your body to the limit and heart rate's through the roof and. So I wouldn't say that there's a type of exercise that you shouldn't be doing. But sometimes starting with just that activation and that control, which is something that I think Pilates can give one. Not always. I've seen a few women that have very strong transverse abdominis corset muscles, but have no idea what or where their pelvic floor is, and they don't use it. So often Pilates can help with that kind of deep core activation. And then I am a big fan of yoga, and I think that there's a lot of space for core and pelvic floor work in yoga. Also, if cued correctly and if done a little bit slower sometimes, just to start off with. From there, you can build on. The same way you'd pick up heavier weights every time you go to the gym. If you want to build on that exercise, you're going to do more reps, you're going to pick up heavier. And that you can do with any form of exercise, really. And I said HIIT training, but running is also a form of HIIT training. Depends on how good you are at it.
Yeah, not my type of running. No, it's more like a low impact.
A slow, sprawly jog. So, yeah, I do believe any and all exercise is fantastic. Often that's the first thing that we stay away from.
Yeah.
It's important, But are the basics there? Are they in place?
Okay, and then in terms of, although this might be generalized, are there general stages that we go through with our pelvic floor in different, like let's say 20 to 30 years old, 30 to 40? Are there changes that generally happen at different stages that we should know about and act differently?
Yes, that's a very good question.
Thanks.
Yes, our pelvic floor will definitely change, like our body does, right? Often, when we are younger, I tend to see tighter pelvic floors. Now, is that because of the human condition? Is that because we are working harder than we've ever worked? We work these 9 to 5s and then we still run a household and clean and all of that. Maybe, but I do tend to see tighter pelvic floors. Now remember, when I say tight, I don't mean, oh, she's got a nice tight pelvic floor. It's not a good thing. It means it's not as functional as it should be. Its ability to relax is not necessarily there. And yeah, I would say that would be kind of the younger pre-baby. Not that everybody wants a baby, but I'm trying to think of the stages of being a woman here.
Generalized.
Yeah, we're generalizing. So if we look at kind of that postpartum period, we often assume that it is a weak pelvic floor. Now remember, tight pelvic floor is also a weak pelvic floor, because if it can't move through its range, it is not strong. Where we can get I'm going to be very loosely, to use loose terms here, I'm going to say a looser pelvic floor. One that's ability to contract is not necessarily there, almost at its end range, hanging a little bit loose. Now often that happens post a typical vaginal delivery. I'm not saying if you get a C-section, your pelvic floor is going to be fine. That's a whole other kettle of fish. That's major abdominal surgery. But I would say that we tend to see looser pelvic floors, especially in the beginning stage in the postpartum period, and they often struggle to activate it. And that is also depending on if they're breastfeeding, due to estrogen. If we've got decreased estrogen, our pelvic floor struggles to contract. Now, estrogen and our tissues, especially internal tissues, mucosal tissue is like the inside of your mouth, that's also what we get inside our vagina. That tends to not have the ability to activate as well as it can. And that's because estrogen's decreased and because you're breastfeeding. When you're breastfeeding, often your body's like, whoa, we just had a baby. This is our focus now. We're not going to be making more quickly. And then as we age, as we move into that menopausal stage, so a kind of older range, I'd say about late 50s, early 50s, depends, into the 60s, into the 70s, we do have a very low estrogen often. And that's also, we tend to see weaker pelvic floors, looser pelvic floors. So that's where you might also see the kind of shifting of an organ into the space of another, which is called a prolapse. Doesn't always happen to older women, can happen to younger women. I myself I've got a little bladder prolapse. They're also in stages. And I'm very happy to share this with people, because people often think, oh, you haven't had a baby, how does this happen to you? Well, I've had a real tight pelvic floor for many a year. That's how it happened. So yeah, we don't accept these things as normal, but if we know that these are the kind of stages, like we said now, that might happen to us, then we can work on it. We can learn about it and try and be proactive, and a pre-habilitation rather than rehabilitation.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, and before we wrap up, I have one more question for you, and it's It's more, I'm thinking of our audience, and I'm thinking of women who are maybe experiencing some kind of dysfunction or pain, but they are apprehensive to see a professional. Why should they? How can this help them? Why is it not as scary as maybe they think? What can they expect? Really, why should you seek professional help and not live with pain for years? Why live with the pain, you know?
So I think one of the biggest things is that women don't know what our sessions look like and what we do and what we can do. So if we look at the types of dysfunction, it's not necessarily just pain, even though pain is quite a common symptom that gets women to go to a physio. Anybody in general. But pain, sure. But leaking, leaking when you sneeze, when you cough, peeing in your pants, it's not okay. And it is especially not okay if you're postpartum. Even though we can understand why it's happening, it's not like you tell your mom and she's like, oh yeah, that happened to me, yeah, that's fine. Just because it happens to many women doesn't mean that it's normal. So leaking, unable to keep pee in for long enough to make it to the toilet, like if I needed the bathroom now, my pelvic floor should hold it in until it is okay for me to go. Within reason. I'm not going to wait for 2 hours. So those are the types of dysfunctions that we can help women with. And then often what a session with a pelvic health physio would look like is a lot of talking. We want to know everything about you. We want to know.
Nosy.
Very nosy. So often the first session is a lot of talking, and then we kind of just figure out where your dysfunction is and what the next steps might be from there. We also can and are trained to do internal assessments. This is why I said we put our fingers up vaginas. So an internal assessment is not at all like a gynae visit. We all know how we feel when we go to the gynae. We're like, this is gonna hurt. It's not at all what the session is supposed to be about. We want to teach you about you, and we want you to understand your body. We want to understand what the muscle tone is like. And we often start by actually just looking at your vulva and making you breathe, which is also something that freaks people out, okay? But I promise, if you've ever been to a pelvic health physio, you'd know that it gives us such a good feedback as to what we can do or where we can go from there. And it's by no means a must in any session. If you don't want an internal assessment, we will not do it. And I've actually said this to many women before. I suggest that we do an internal, and this is what it's going to look like. But if you wanted to stop, we'll stop. And that's consent. And consent is something I personally take extremely seriously. And consent is not always just verbal, it's body language. So if I see that a woman is really uncomfortable, we don't do the assessment. We talk about it. We prep it for next time. Or there are many other machines or tools that we can use for diagnosis. But often an internal is the easiest way to get that feedback and for you to feel the feedback. And what we do is we feel where the organs are. Bladder's at the top, rectum's at the bottom. We can feel if they've moved into the space of another one. We often make you bear down like you're really trying to push something out. And we feel if the organs shift with any sort of increase in pressure. Might make you cough. Might ask you to contract if you know how to do it. And if you don't know how to do it, we teach you how to contract. So it's very much a session where you totally get to know yourself. And from there, we work on exercises and we bring in deep core exercises, breathing exercises, stretches, depending on what we find. And we work towards your function. If you're peeing while you run, after 10 minutes or after 10 kilometers, then that's what we have to work towards to get you to stop doing that. So it's quite intricate, but it's quite intimate. But it is actually, I'd like to say, a beautiful process of getting to know yourself. And then from there, we might refer to a doctor that we might work closely with, a urogyne, a gynae, someone who works with sexual health, a sexologist, a psychologist. We always like to work closely with a multidisciplinary team. That's the best way to help you with your dysfunction.
Right. Well, I hope if anybody is struggling at all or even has any questions that they will reach out and just, I mean, you're saying you can even have a talking session, so it's nothing to really be scared about. And I just hope that anyone who is struggling, rather than building up the fear and anxiety around it, would take this approach. So the question that I ask all my guests when we're wrapping up is, what does it mean to you to live a world-class life?
That is also a good question.
It's deep, eh?
It is. It's real deep. I think I'm gonna bring it back to what I like to teach my patients or the people that I see often. I think to live, or at least there's always hope for pain, and to live a pain-free and happy, healthy life. You just need to know more about you. You need to understand your body. So I guess for me, it means to know myself, or I know myself best, and I can help myself best if I allow myself to work on it, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It does. It's like having that trust that you do know yourself, and I understand you're saying to believe that you can live a pain-free life, and that is world class, obviously. All right, that's beautiful. Thank you. So Emma, where can people find you? I know by the time this episode airs, you will not be in South Africa anymore, but you have a great social media page. So how can people connect with you, and do you have any anything upcoming that you want to share with our audience?
So you can always connect with me. You can follow me on social media. On Instagram, I am Powerful Pelvis Physio. And I don't have anything big coming up other than I am moving to Sydney, Australia, and I'm starting to work for a practice there where I will be heading up their pelvic health section. So maybe just following me and sending me a DM. I love to chat on Instagram. I can't ever give personal advice because as a healthcare professional we can't do that, but I love to ask questions and get some feedback from my followers. So if you want to check me out there, you're welcome to. I also do have a podcast that I am planning on being a little bit more or be better with. It's called Let's Be Honest Podcast, and there we also discuss pelvic health and pain and any sort of kind of physio related things that you might want to know about. So go follow it. I promise we will do a lot more, and I'll have some Aussie guests on there. But that's it from me.
All right, that's great. Thank you for doing what you do. I think it's so great and it's so empowering for women. So thank you, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.